Retro.
What's up, guys? This is Daniel Logan, Boba Fett from Attack of the Clones, The Clone Wars, Book of Boba, Skywalker Saga game, and hopefully many more things in the Star Wars galaxy. You are listening to Jay and Dennis on Podcast Stardust. Yep, this is the way I've spoken.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And we are taking a step back into the Clone Wars for this episode. But before we do that, Jay, I want to go ahead and remind everybody what our social media contacts are.
Absolutely. We are on Facebook and Instagram, conveniently, at Podcast Stardust.
Okay, the dish is aligned. The signal's boosted to maximum output. The shield is down. We are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So we're going to be talking about Episode 3 from Season 3 of the Clone Wars, which is called Supply Lines. Jay, you want to go ahead and give us the summary of the episode to kick off this conversation?
Sure thing. Ryloth is under siege from the Separatists, and the Twi'leks are running out of food and medical supplies. When the Separatists defeat the Republic fleet, the only hope of getting those supplies to Ryloth is through blockade runners. The Jedi and the Republic want to use Toydaria as a staging base for this humanitarian mission and send Jar Binks and Senator Organa to negotiate a treaty. However, Senator Lot Dodd of the Trade Federation arrives and convinces King I always get this wrong. Help me out, Dennis.
Katunko.
Convinces King Katunko that providing any such aid would put both the Trade Federation and Toydaria's neutrality in danger. However, King Katunko conspires with Jar Jar and Senator Organa to deliver the aid behind the Trade Federation's back, and their mission is successful after Jar Jar provides a timely dinner distraction.
So again, it's still a relatively early episode of the Clone Wars, episode 3 of season 3 out of 7 seasons. And this episode serves as a prequel to the very first episode from season 1, Ambush, where Yoda is meeting with King Kotoko to talk about a treaty, whereas they'll set up a base there on Toydaria. And it is also leads into the events of the Ryloth trilogy that takes place at the end of season 1, where they liberate the planet from the Separatists. So with that as our background here, what did you think about this episode overall, Jay?
That was great to revisit it. And, it's kind of crazy how Clone Wars does that, where it jumps around in the actual timing, sequentially or chronologically, if you will, of the events of the Clone Wars. So it is kind of nice to be able to take this particular episode and frame it around those others that you just mentioned and sort of have a one continuous story arc kind of thing. And just the fact that we get a lot of the Ryloth history, I guess, and getting Sham Syndulla, which of course is Hera Syndulla's dad. And so after Rebels, I know I went back and watched these quite a few times and just getting that perspective historically of, where he is in the whole scheme of things as far as a freedom fighter and whatnot. But aside from that, this episode, after I watched it again, I thought to myself, it's crazy how non-kid oriented some of these Clone Wars episodes can actually be. And yeah, you've got your fun little Jar Binks, antics, and you've got some action and things like that. But realistically speaking, there's a lot of, adult political kinds of things going on in this. And it just goes to prove that the war isn't just being fought on the battlefield, it's also being fought in arenas such as this, with these blockades and starving out these planets. And obviously it's not anything new. We saw this even with the blockade on Naboo in the Phantom Menace, but still it's just a reminder of how layered, I guess you could say, Clone Wars is. But that was very long-winded, I know. But what did you think?
No, it's it's a good episode. It's not one of the most memorable episodes, I think. I feel like a lot of our coverage later is like, oh, I forgot, this was such a good episode, and it's one that we could visit over and over again. And I just haven't revisited this one frequently. It's one that'll be on when I'm in the background or whatever. But since we were doing a discussion of it, I really paid attention this time. And yeah, the politics really stood out to me. There's some complexity there that we'll discuss in just a bit. The thing with Jar Jar is that if you don't like Jar Jar, then this episode is going to annoy you based on the antics that happen in the back. How his little dinner shenanigans is what really saves the day. But if you're a little bit more neutral or like Jar Jar, then you're going to be fine with all this. So yeah, there it is. Yeah, it's a good one. I also like how the Clone Wars kind of skips around, and it's something they kind of got away from the farther you get into the Clone Wars. They quit going back in time as much, and then they didn't do that at all in Rebels, right? They just
Right.
told a story and kept it going. And then the Bad Batch also didn't do any of that type of jumping around there. They just told a linear story, one thing followed the next with there. But I remember when the Clone Wars was coming out, they were kind of talking about this as a possibility, that you would have these stories that take place at different part of the Clone Wars. And frankly, that got me thinking, is like, you could do a season 8 of Clone Wars today if you wanted, and tell stories about missions featuring any Jedi you wanted that takes place at any point during the 3 years of the war. And it would
Oh,
totally
cool.
work if you wanted to do it just doing this way. And they really leave it up to the audience to figure out that this is not something that just happened after the last episode you saw. This is a prequel to everything that you've seen in the Clone Wars so far.
Mhm. Mhm. No, I love how you put that because you're absolutely right, and that just makes me think about all the possibilities that could potentially happen because of course there's so many different worlds and there's so many different Jedi and there's so many different missions. And again, just focusing on whatever world you want to focus on at the time and fill in gaps that way, even though the Clone Wars does have kind of a central character base, of course, with Ahsoka and Anakin and Obi-Wan, just as Rebels does or just as the Bad Batch does. Those two, as you said, being more linear, there's not as much wiggle room to tell more stories.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I love that idea. And it almost makes you wonder too with the Clone Wars if they did that really purposely, or was it kind of a, oh yeah, we meant to do that kind of a thing, where they would come up with like, oh, what if we told this story, oh, but that's not really in the same kind of time, like, oh, that's okay, we can just go back in time you know
Yeah, I think when you got a guy like George Lucas, who made a fortune off of telling 3 movies and then decided to tell 3 movies that took place before that. He's not the first person to ever do a prequel, but he's kind of the person that made it famous, that made this type
Mhm.
of a thing like a big deal, that it's not important to him that necessarily, oh, we can't go back and tell that story because we've already told this one. And I think for him, and I'm guessing a little bit here, that they had tons of stories. They decided to adopt or adapt certain scripts into the episodes we got, but then later, I know in some instances we've heard where they've gone back and done this, like they didn't have the art assets yet to do the story that they wanted for that time period, so they had to wait to do it.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
they just weren't not going to tell the story because they'd already moved past that era. They would go back and tell those stories. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's the type of thing George would do all the time. So let's talk a little bit about here. We've been talking about the politics. So Toydaria is a neutral world. And as we come to find out over the course of this episode, they are driven by this type of thing, providing aid, of looking out for people. And in fact, one of the king's advisors points out that their constitution kind of mandates that they help people that need assistance here. But then Lot Dodd gets sent on the down low by Count Dooku after they've intercepted, or the Separatists have intercepted a mission that Bail Organa and Jar Jar were going to do this, and has Lod show up and say that and object to this entire arrangement that Bail Organa is proposing. And the reasons he give are that the Toydaria is a neutral world, and if they get involved in this, then they are going to be helping out the Republic because there are Republic soldiers there. which would call into question their neutrality. But the Trade Federation is also neutral. And before, and Dodd practically shouts this down, like, before you even bring up Viceroy Nute Gunray, he is he's an extremist, and he's essentially
Yeah.
defected from the Trade Federation, is helping out the separatists. But the Trade Federation itself is in fact neutral, and it's working on both sides, which I don't understand how as a neutral world it can maintain representation in the Senate, but that's neither here nor there. And the point being that if there's a relationship between Toydarian and the Trade Federation, and if you violate your neutrality, then we can't do business with you, because that will put our neutrality at risk, and we will be at a risk of being attacked by the separatists. And then one of the ministers there on the King's Council says, well, we have to consider our economy. So they, at first blush, it was just kind of like, when I saw a lot Dodd show up, I was like, well, why are you objecting to all of this if you're claiming that you are in fact a Republic senator? But it takes a little while, but they do lay out the pieces for us. What did you think of this entire relationship?
Yeah,
Arrangement, I
it's
should say.
it's very sorted in a lot of different ways. And when you brought that up, when Lot Dad talks about oh shoot, Viceroy Gunray as being an extremist, the first thing I thought of was Saw Gerrera and how
Mhm.
they talked about him being an extremist in the rebellion. So, but is he truly, or are they just kind of playing this card kind of thing? My whole thing was, why is Lot Dot even looking at this as being something that they need to even worry about? You know what I mean? As far as I understand that they are trying to with the trade federation trying to keep everything kind of in line, but
Mhm.
obviously, there's they're against the republic. They've got to be. So they say that they're neutral, but they're not. So there's so many sticky areas going on here that you can fall into.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just because we know from Attack of the Clones that there's this statement that Co Bevel makes that after how many trials that Nute Gunray has had in the Senate, that he's still free at this point. They
Mhm,
haven't been able to
mhm.
convict him, and there is a problem. Captain Panaka saying at the end of the Phantom Menace that there goes your charter, and because of the Trade Federation had this blockade. So you got to believe that a lot of this is face saving on behalf of Senator Dodd, to protect the interests of the Trade Federation when they are in fact working both sides of this. We read the Brotherhood book by Mike Chen, and Cato Neimoidia is a Republic world. And despite the fact that the Trade Federation is mainly made up of Neimoidians, they are in fact a different thing
Mhm.
from the representation. It kind of so it's one of those deals where, when we get the opening crawl to the Phantom Menace and they're talking about taxation of trade routes is causing all this problems, you're like, really? that's
Right.
that's what our saga is about, taxation.
Mhm.
But they don't really have the room necessarily to explain all this stuff or to make everyone understand it or to understand why it's a big deal. And I guess that's one of the reasons why I appreciate this episode, is that it does add that layer of complexity. And if you're paying attention, you get it by the end of
Mhm.
this.
Mhm. And that's what I was saying at the very beginning is that, it is appealing for the parents that might be watching this
Mhm.
because for the kids, this is going to go completely over their head. And it does it in such a way though that especially when Jar Jar gets involved, that it'll hook the kids back in for sure.
Yeah. The other thing this does is that, Count Dooku sent Lot Dodd to do this. And so that Lot Dodd actually has ties to Viceroy Gunray. I mean,
Mhm.
that's just it's their dirty secret here. And the Trade Federation, the banking clan, the Techno Union, they were all these quote unquote neutral worlds were actually part of the Separatist Council in this. And they were basically hiding that fact. There was a Separatist Senate that gets alluded to here. Lot Dodd brings it up, that there's a Separatist Senate. And then at the end, when of Revenge of the Sith, when Anakin shows up on Mustafar and Viceroy Gunray is like pleading with him, it's like, wait a minute, Palpatine or Sidious promised us peace. He doesn't get what's going on. He does not understand how badly they've been being used. But you can see the complexity of how badly they were being used in
Yeah.
episodes like this.
Yeah, it's so true.
Mhm. One of the things I want to talk on is that you've got Jedi Master Dai, who is the Nick-2 Jedi that is leading the resistance on Ryloth. And the trivia guide for the trivia section of the episode guide goes out to point how his full name is Ima-Gun Die, as in I'm gonna die. So it
Oh
was a
my
little
gosh.
bit of something cheeky that he's not going to make outside of this episode. And then the admiral that's in charge of that fleet is Admiral Dow, which is actually Admiral DAO, which stands for Dead on Arrival.
Oh boy.
So they basically were giving throwaway names to these short-lived characters. I would love to have seen more of Jedi Master Dai, though. I thought that character looked so cool.
Yes.
He seemed like he was so dedicated to the Force. He sacrificed himself, and not only him, but the clones. Captain Keeley, that was serving underneath him. They came up with this plan when the battle droids and the Separatist armies were closing in on them. They're going to collapse one pass so that the Separatists had to come down another, which would buy the Twi'lek time to escape. And he doesn't come out and say, we're sacrificing ourselves, we're not going to survive this mission. But it was understood by everybody in that moment. And then when it finally comes down to that battle, the clones put up a stiff fight. General Dai is doing the same thing. And he basically tells Captain Keel, let's make this memorable. And they go down fighting. It was quite a scene.
Yes, I think they make such a cool team together. And seeing a
Mhm.
Nick-2 Jedi, we don't see that. I mean, you see that
Mhm.
as like, Hondo Ohnaka and all kinds of, different ways, but not really as Jedi. And I really like the look of Captain Keeley too, not just the armor, but the way that they had his like facial hair cut out and his hair, and all of that. And I just think that the aesthetics behind that particular armor and everything was really cool. But yeah, I would love to have seen more adventures with the two of them. I think they
Yeah.
made such a great team.
Just an aside, Hondo was actually a weak way, not Nick too.
Or a week way. Yes, sorry. Yes, you're right.
No,
Oh my gosh.
no big
Right
deal.
after that. Yep.
And I think there actually was a Jedi Nick too at the Battle of Geonosis, but I can't remember
Was there?
specifically. Yeah, the episode guide suggested there was, but I couldn't remember specifically. But anyway, neither here nor there. Other thing is that okay, we brought it up in passing, but this whole diversion. So after King Katunko hears both the arguments from Bail and the plea for aid for the Twi'leks on Ryloth, and Lotdide says, their plight is regrettable, and he does have sympathy for them, but he's looking out for the Trade Federation and looking out for Toydaria by objecting to this assistance because it would jeopardize their neutrality. And Katunko says, well, I'm going to have to reject this offer. But then he comes right after Bail and Jar Jar and says, look, we can, you can go ahead and take the supplies that you've already brought with you to Ryloth if you can guarantee that we're not going to basically be found out if we're having participated in this. And so Bail goes to supervise all that while Jar Jar attends this dinner party on floating dinner
Mhm.
table, which is pretty cool. Um,
Mhm.
then he performs his whole little, what did he call it? Conceptual art, where he gets up on the table, takes everyone's glasses and plates, and then makes a tower over it to honor the senator from the Trade Federation. So, what do you think of Jar Jar's little performance there?
Well, I think Dave Filoni put it best in the featurette is
Mhm.
that, is he just the comic relief? Does Jar Jar really have this, all figured out kind of thing? So, I think a lot of us just dismiss Jar Jar as just being that comic relief, but really in this episode, he is pretty instrumental. I mean, those diversional tactics or distraction are really vital to holding or hiding the relief shipments. So
Mhm.
it's because of that. And it reminds me also of later on we get him in what was it, Aftermath, or one of the Chuck Wendig novels that he's
Mhm.
performing, in the streets and that kind of thing. So it's kind of a foreshadowing in that way. But yeah, he's definitely instrumental in this, which you don't really think about him being that way, but it's true.
Yeah, I got Dave Filoni's point on that, and I appreciate what he's trying to say, but it kind of the thing about Jar Jar is just that it's like it's almost I think it's almost too easy to look at this and say he was accidentally helpful here. You know, he was, by being a buffoon, he was able to distract this representative from the Trade Federation there. And okay, Jar Jar may not be known as one of the great minds of the Republic and stuff like that. He gets taken advantage of in Attack of the Clones to help authorize the creation of the Grand Army of the Republic and give emergency powers to the Chancellor. So he gets taken advantage of it here. And so I don't know. I mean, I don't need him to come out and give the statesman speech for the ages or something, but perhaps something just a bit more subtle that's just not over the top would have been cool for Jar Jar in that moment to get to see. Because, you know, think about when we see him in battles, you know, how much of him screeching and accidentally pulling down the gate, which, you know, lets out the things that take out the droid tanks and whatever there. It's like very seldom does he do something that's, how to phrase this? I mean, I don't want to say intentional because this was intentional, but something that he can do to, there seems like it has a little bit more intellectual depth to it towards creating a resolution to something.
Yeah. This is basically just boils down to Jar Jar doing Jar Jar things.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and you got to add that element too for the kids. Like I said, I think that that's probably that sense of balance in some ways, that you've got all of this political weight and then you throw Jar Jar in to do Jar Jar things. Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't absolutely hate it, but again, at some point it would be nice to see Jar Jar come up with a solution that is just not kind of like, and this goes for a lot of the Gungans. I mean, there's certain we've seen Gungans take down Grievous en masse, but frequently it's like if there's one individual Gungan, then they're going to lean towards the buffoonery side of things. And yeah, okay. I mean, let's maybe turn that trope on its head from time to time.
And, you know, I guess maybe the bigger question is, why was Jar Jar there to begin with?
Well, that's just it. It's like, because Bale says that when he's contacted by Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Mace, which is like, Senator Amidala is more than qualified to handle this. And their response is that, well, she had to stay here, so we sent someone else who's less qualified. They send Jar Jar. I mean, I'm paraphrasing there, but it was like, wait a minute. Of all the senators and the diplomats you have on the planet, that was the only thing you could do next. And then when you realized how desperate things were, then you contacted Bale. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I understand it is, in fact, Jar Jar's nature that gets this resolved, but it didn't seem like a whole lot of forethought on behalf of the Republic and the Jedi to do that in the first place.
Especially when you've got an entire planet that is potentially suffering from starvation.
Yeah. We brought this up in a news episode recently, but I want to touch on it again. The Tantive 4 makes an appearance here, and the episode guide goes out of its way to point out that this is the actual Tantive 4, that they went to great pains to make sure that this blockade runner matched the ship that we get to see in the beginning of A New Hope, which apparently for some time had just been referred to as Leia's ship, and then it was other secondary material that actually called it the Tantive 4. And while that is true, everyone had assumed, and certain publications at the time of the Revenge of the Sith called Bale's ship in Revenge of the Sith the Tantive 4. That ship was in fact called the Sundered Heart. So just kind of a neat type of a moment there. But frankly, I'm not sure I'd ever noticed the difference between the Sundered Heart and the Tantive 4 until it was pointed out to me.
No, I never would have noticed any difference. But, I don't have the best eye for that kind of thing. So it doesn't surprise me that it would have gotten past me. But this is a really cool piece of trivia, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I thought that was pretty cool too.
Mm-hmm.
And then the episode ends with basically a direct lead into Ambush, where after Lot Dodd realizes he's been had, but he can't prove it, he goes storming off, and Bale, Jar Jar, and King Katunko are basically congratulating each other for pulling off this relief mission. And then Katunko says to Bale that maybe he should reconsider his Toydarian neutrality, and he's now ready to meet with the Jedi. To which Bale responds, Master Yoda will be, glad to do that. And so that's bleeds us directly in to that first episode we saw. So that was a neat little way of creating a transition and kind of reminding us where this episode belongs in the timeline without saying, hey, everybody, this belongs right before Ambush.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But that's what I've got. Did you have anything else from this episode you want to talk about before we wrap it
Oh,
up?
not really. I mean, I think we hit all the main things and how it ties into, other arcs, and as you mentioned, Ambush, and it does it very nicely.
Yeah. I guess the only last thing that occurred to me is just Champs and Dula. You touched on him a little bit here, but we kind of see the reason why he distrusts the Republic here, because General Dai and the clones were promising relief that just wasn't coming. And then it finally showed up, but it was a fraction of what was
Mhm.
promised there. So that does add some depth to that Ryloth trilogy of episodes that come at the end of season 1.
Yes,
Yeah. So there's that. But if
definitely.
there's nothing else, then we'll go ahead and wrap up this episode. And thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust, a discussion of this episode of the Clone Wars. And if you've enjoyed it, then please consider subscribing to the podcast if you haven't done so already. We'll be continuing our coverage of the Clone Wars. We try to get through one episode a week when we don't have a current Star Wars series on. And right now we're going through Visions, which is kind of delayed things, but we'll be picking that up and then taking a break again when we get to the new Maul series, which I can't wait for. But beyond that, you want to find more episodes of Podcast Stardust, then head over to Shazat.com. The entire catalog, all previous 972 episodes that we've recorded over the past 6 years can be found there. Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody one more time about our social media contacts and where else we have set up shop online?
Absolutely. So we are so easy to find. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. We like to keep it easy that way. And you can also hit us up on all of our Pinterest boards for tons of ideas for everything Star Wars. And then we also have our 2 YouTube outlets, which includes the traditional YouTube as well as YouTube Music. So head over to both of those, like, subscribe, and share those out. And you can also send us an email, podcaststardust@gmail.com. So let us know what you thought of this episode. And also, please send us some questions, because when we have enough, we will put them together in a listener question episode. And we'd love to do that. And then last but not least, we have our TeePublic link to our merchandise. So you can pick up one of 7 different show logo designs available on everything from home goods and apparel and pretty much everything in between. So once again, head up that link in our show notes. And if you do happen to pick something up, thank you very kindly, because every one of those purchases does help to support the show.
All right, upcoming on the show on Friday, we'll be wrapping up the week with a look at some recent Star Wars news. And then on Monday, we'll be wrapping up our coverage of Volume 3 of Star Wars Visions. So make sure you come back for those. With that, just want to say thanks for listening to episode 973 of Podcast Stars, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. And until next time, may the Force be